The morning sun barely broke through the tropical clouds over Rendova Island when Private First Class Evan Evans took his position behind the sandbags. 22 years old, just 3 weeks into what the Marines grimly called their tour of hell, he watched the sky with exhausted vigilance. The date was July 4th, 1943, and history was about to be written in smoke and fire above the Solomon Islands. 2 days earlier, 59 Americans had died on this exact beach. The Japanese had come with overwhelming force, 18 bombers, escorted by hundreds of fighters, striking without warning when radar sets lay broken and useless. Evans had watched helplessly as fire consumed the beach, as explosions threw debris hundreds of feet skyward, as Marines ran through flames trying desperately to reach wounded men. Most never made it. The Marines had a name for this cursed stretch of sand: Suicide Point. Every supply ship that approached the island had to pass it. Every Marine could see it burn, and everyone knew the Japanese would return. The 9th Defense Battalion had landed on Rendova just days before, with a simple but daunting mission: protect the beachhead while Army artillery pounded Japanese positions across Blanche Channel. They brought 12 90mm anti-aircraft guns, organized into 3 batteries of 4 guns each. These weapons were supposed to create an impenetrable umbrella of flak that no Japanese plane could survive. Instead, they had become little more than noisemakers, firing blindly at targets they couldn't track. The problem was mathematics and physics colliding with the brutal reality of war. The Japanese Mitsubishi Betty bomber could fly at 270 miles per hour. At that speed, a bomber crossed 2 miles in just 27 seconds. Without radar, human eyes, and mechanical calculators simply couldn't track fast enough. The gun crews would fire, their shells would climb toward altitude, and by the time they exploded, the Japanese were already gone, untouched, untroubled, and ready to drop their deadly cargo on American positions below. Evans had fired 32 rounds during the previous attack. He hadn't hit anything. None of them had. The frustration was suffocating, made worse by the knowledge that tomorrow, or the next day, or the day after that, the Japanese would return. And next time, there might not be enough Marines left to bury the dead. The morning of July 3rd brought something unexpected: rain. Not the gentle tropical showers that passed quickly, but solid, punishing rain that turned Rendova into a swamp. Marines stood guard duty in water up to their knees. Supplies rotted on the beach. But the rain brought one precious gift: the Japanese didn't fly in heavy weather. The 9th Defense Battalion used those desperate hours to salvage what they could. Mechanics worked through the night, pulling parts from damaged equipment, improvising repairs with whatever materials they could scavenge. By dawn on July 4th, something miraculous had happened. The radar operators reported their SCR-268 sets were operational. Not perfect, but functional enough to see what was coming. Gun directors checked their equipment. Fire control systems showed green. Communications were established between all 12 gun positions. Evans loaded shells into the ready rack, his crew moving through their drills with mechanical precision: loader, rammer, fuse, setter, gunner. They had practiced these movements 10,000 times in training, but training never prepared anyone for what was about to happen. At 8:45 in the morning, radar detected a large formation inbound from Rabaul. Distance: 120 miles. The formation was flying straight down the slot, headed directly for Rendova. Lieutenant Colonel William Scheer gave the order. Every gun crew stood ready. This time they had radar. This time they would see the Japanese coming. And this time, Evan Evans was about to prove that one Marine with a 90mm gun could change the mathematics of air defense forever. The radar operators called out updates every 30 seconds. The Japanese formation had split. One group turned toward New Georgia. The other kept coming straight at Rendova, 16 bombers, escorted by nearly 200 fighters. The Combat Air Patrol had been pulled north to intercept a different raid. Rendova's guns were alone. Evans watched his gun director, a Sperry mechanical computer that received radar data and calculated where shells needed to explode to intercept moving targets. In theory, the system worked automatically. In practice, it was awkward and imprecise. The best gun crews could get their shells within 200 meters of a target. A 90mm shell had a burst radius of about 50 meters. That meant multiple guns firing had barely any chance of scoring hits. But Evans didn't have multiple guns. He had one, Battery C, Gun 3. And in the next few minutes, that single gun would become the deadliest anti-aircraft weapon in the Pacific Theater. At 9:15, the air raid siren began its mournful wail. Men ran for foxholes. Medics grabbed their kits. The construction battalions stopped unloading supply ships and took cover. Within 30 seconds, the beach that had been crowded with activity was suddenly empty except for the gun crews. They stayed at their positions because someone had to stand between the Japanese and the men hiding in those foxholes. When the formation reached 30 miles out, Scheer gave the order to commence firing. All 12 guns opened up simultaneously. The sound was overwhelming, apocalyptic. Each gun fired a shell every 3 seconds. 24-pound projectiles screamed into the sky at 2,800 feet per second. The noise made speech impossible. The concussion from muzzle blasts knocked dust from sandbags and rattled teeth in skulls. Evans settled into the rhythm his body had learned through endless repetition. The loader grabbed a shell from the ready rack. The rammer shoved it into the breech. The fuse setter dialed in the time. The breech closed. The gun fired. The empty casing ejected. 3 seconds, over and over. Load, ram, set, fire. Load, ram, set, fire. At 20 miles out, the first American shells began bursting at altitude. Black puffs of smoke appeared in the sky ahead of the Japanese formation. Too far left, the Japanese adjusted course slightly and kept coming. Evans watched through the gun sight as his shells exploded 500 meters from the lead bomber. Close, but not close enough. A near miss meant nothing. Only direct hits or very close bursts could bring down a bomber. At 12 miles, the lead Betty bomber began its descent to attack altitude. The bombardiers would be looking through their sights now, calculating wind speed, adjusting for the island's position. Rendova was a stationary target, impossible to miss. In 3 minutes, they would be directly overhead. In 4 minutes, they would be dropping bombs. Evans kept firing. His gun was heating up, the barrel temperature rising with each shot. Too hot and the rifling would warp, making the gun inaccurate. But there was no time to let it cool. The Japanese weren't waiting. At 10 miles, something happened that changed everything. Battery C's gun director locked onto the lead bomber with unusual precision. The radar return was strong and clean. The mechanical computer began calculating intercept solutions with an accuracy that shouldn't have been possible. The gun elevated 2 degrees, adjusted azimuth 3 degrees left. Evans fired. The shell left the barrel at half a mile per second and climbed through 8,000 feet of tropical air. The variable time fuse counted down. 18 seconds after leaving the gun, the shell exploded 200 meters ahead of the lead Betty. The bomber flew straight into the blast. Shrapnel tore through the right engine. The engine caught fire immediately, pouring black smoke from the nacelle. The pilot tried to maintain formation. Japanese training and discipline were legendary, but the fire spread. Within 30 seconds, flames were visible along the entire right wing. The bomber dropped out of formation and started losing altitude. The pilot chose to turn back toward Japanese-held territory. The Betty rolled right and began a shallow descent toward the channel. It never made it. At 6,000 feet, the right wing separated from the fuselage. The bomber tumbled out of the sky and hit the water 4 miles northwest of Rendova. 1 down, 15 to go. The remaining bombers tightened their formation, now at 7 miles and close enough that Evans could see them without binoculars. Their bomb bay doors were opening. Battery C fired again and again. The other 90mm guns across Rendova joined in. The sky filled with black bursts. The Japanese formation disappeared into a cloud of flak. When the smoke cleared, 2 more Bettys were trailing smoke. One had lost its tail section and went into an immediate spin. The other tried to maintain altitude but was losing power from both engines. Neither made it past 5 miles from the island. 3 down. The Japanese bombardiers released their loads early. They were supposed to fly directly over Rendova before dropping, but instead they dumped their bombs at 6 miles out and turned hard to the west. Bombs fell into empty ocean. Massive geysers of water erupted half a mile from shore. Not a single bomb hit the island. Evans didn't stop firing. The Japanese were running now, but they were still in range. The Bettys had spent fuel getting to Rendova. They were heavy with armor and defensive guns, and they were trying to climb to escape the flak, which made them slower and predictable. Battery C's gun director tracked a bomber in the middle of the formation. Evans adjusted his aim and fired. The shell burst 50 meters below the bomber's belly. Close enough, the concussion wave hit the aircraft like a hammer. The Betty's nose pitched down violently. The pilot fought for control and lost. The bomber entered a dive it couldn't recover from. 4 down. The remaining 12 Bettys were splitting up now. Formation discipline had completely broken. Each pilot was flying for his own survival. Some headed west toward New Georgia. Others turned northwest back toward Rabaul. The Zero escort had disappeared entirely. The fighters had seen enough, but the Marines hadn't. And in the next 60 seconds, Evans and Battery C were about to add 8 more bombers to their tally. The gun barrel was glowing now, heat waves rising from the metal. The crew had fired 42 rounds in 7 minutes, a rate of fire that should have been impossible to sustain. Evans didn't care. Neither did his crew. They kept loading. A Betty broke west, trying to escape over New Georgia, climbing hard to 9,000 feet. The pilot thought altitude would save him. Battery C's radar locked on. The gun director calculated the intercept. Evans fired twice in quick succession. The first shell missed high. The second shell exploded 30 meters behind the bomber's tail, severing the elevator controls. The Betty's nose dropped. The pilot tried to compensate with engine power. The bomber went into a flat spin and crashed into the jungle 3 miles inland on New Georgia. 5 down. 2 more Bettys were heading northwest together, flying low at 5,000 feet, trying to stay under the radar. Rendova's radar could track targets down to 3,000 feet. Battery C took the lead bomber. Battery E took the trailer. Both guns fired within seconds of each other. Both scored hits. The lead Betty took a direct hit to the port engine. The engine exploded. The wing folded. The bomber rolled inverted and went straight down into Blanche Channel. The second Betty lost its tail section and flew for another 8 seconds before entering an uncontrollable dive. 7 down. The sky over Rendova was filled with smoke now. Burning aircraft debris was falling into the ocean. Oil slicks spread across the water. The remaining 9 Japanese bombers were scattered across a 10-mile radius. No formation, no coordination, just individual pilots trying to survive. 3 Bettys turned due west, heading for the open ocean. They were abandoning the mission, running for home. But home was 400 miles away, and they had to cross 200 miles of ocean that was now filling with American shells. Battery C tracked the nearest bomber. Range, 8 miles. Altitude, 7,000 feet. Speed, 280 miles per hour. The bomber was running at full power, probably burning fuel at twice the normal rate. Evans fired 3 rounds. The third one exploded directly underneath the bomber's fuselage. The blast tore through the bomb bay. The Betty hadn't dropped all its ordnance. 500-pound bombs detonated inside the aircraft. The explosion was massive. Pieces of the bomber scattered across half a mile of ocean. 8 down. The other batteries across Rendova were getting hits now, too. Battery E claimed 2 more bombers in quick succession. Battery A got another. The sky had become a shooting gallery. Evans swung his gun to track another Betty heading due north at maximum range, 10 miles out at 11,000 feet and climbing. The pilot had figured out that altitude was his only chance, but 11,000 feet was barely a third of the 90 millimeters effective range. Evans elevated the gun to maximum and fired. The shell climbed for 22 seconds and exploded 200 meters ahead of the bomber. The pilot saw the burst and turned hard right directly into the next shell. The blast hit the cockpit. The Betty's nose shattered. The aircraft tumbled out of control and fell into the ocean 9 miles north of Rendova. 9 down. The ceasefire order came at 9:32, 27 minutes after the first radar contact. The guns fell silent. The sudden quiet was almost painful after the continuous roar of the cannons. Evans stepped back from his gun. His hands were shaking, not from fear, but from exhaustion. His ears were ringing so badly he could barely hear. The gun crew collapsed against the sandbags. They'd been firing non-stop for 27 minutes, their bodies moving on pure muscle memory. The gunner's log showed 53 rounds fired from Battery C's gun, 3 alone. Across Rendova, the 12 90mm guns had expended a total of 88 shells to engage 16 bombers. The results were unprecedented. By 10:30, the radar operators confirmed what the gun crews already knew. 4 Japanese bombers had escaped. 4 out of 16. That meant 12 had gone down. 12 bombers destroyed in 27 minutes. The 9th Defense Battalion had just set a record. No American anti-aircraft unit in the Pacific had ever achieved that kill ratio. Not at Guadalcanal, not at Midway, not anywhere. 12 bombers with 88 rounds meant a hit rate of nearly 14%. Most anti-aircraft units were happy with 2%. But the numbers didn't tell the whole story. The gun crews had done more than shoot down airplanes. They'd broken a Japanese attack completely. 16 bombers had approached Rendova carrying 8,000 pounds of bombs, each 28,000 pounds of high explosives meant for the beach, for the supply dumps, for the Marines. Not one bomb hit the island. Work parties began recovering debris from the water by mid-morning. Pieces of Japanese aircraft were washing up on the beach, engine cowlings, wing sections, a tail assembly with the red circle still visible. The wreckage spread across 5 miles of ocean. The island that had been called Suicide Point 2 days ago had just proven it could defend itself. By afternoon, a photographer from the Marine Corps Combat Camera Unit arrived at Battery C. He wanted pictures of the gun crew that had scored the most kills. Evans and his crew stood beside their 90mm gun, Boone, on the left, Evans in the middle, Gamborowski on the right. 3 Marines who had just made history. The photographer took 6 pictures. Only 1 survived the war. It ended up in the National Archives with a simple caption. This is one of the anti-aircraft guns which wiped out a Japanese bomber fleet of 12 planes in a single day at Rendova Island. But while that photograph was being taken, something else was happening 400 miles northwest. At Rabaul, Japanese commanders were receiving reports from the 4 bombers that had escaped. The Americans had accurate radar-directed anti-aircraft fire, and that meant every Japanese air base in the Solomons had just become vulnerable. The mathematics of air combat in the Pacific had just changed. The lessons from Rendova spread throughout the theater like wildfire. Radar-directed anti-aircraft fire became standard procedure. Gun crews trained on the integration techniques the 9th Defense Battalion had pioneered. Kill ratios improved across the board. Japanese bombers faced increasingly deadly defensive fire at every American position. By 1944, Japanese daylight bombing raids had become rare. By 1945, they'd stopped almost entirely. The Japanese couldn't replace their losses fast enough, couldn't train new crews fast enough. The mathematics that Evan Evans and Battery C had demonstrated on July 4, 1943, had scaled across the entire Pacific theater. Evans was promoted to corporal in October, but received no medals. Defense Battalion personnel rarely received medals for anti-aircraft work. Shooting down planes was considered routine duty. He went on to fight at Guam, survived dengue fever that nearly killed him, and watched as his battalion's total climbed to 46 confirmed kills by war's end. But July 4th remained their best day, 12 kills in one engagement that no American anti-aircraft unit ever matched. Evans returned to Richmond, Indiana, in 1946. He'd left as a 21-year-old private and came back as a decorated sergeant. He re-enlisted, served through Korea, made staff sergeant, and left the Marines in 1953 with 11 years of service and 2 wars behind him. He worked as a machinist, married, had children, lived a quiet life. But he never forgot July 4th, 1943, the day the planes fell, the day Suicide Point became a graveyard, the day 88 shells killed 12 bombers and changed everything. He never talked about it much. Most veterans didn't. The ones who'd been there knew what happened. The ones who hadn't wouldn't understand. So Evans kept it quiet, worked his job, raised his family, lived his life, Until 1993, 50 years after Rendova, when a Marine Corps researcher found the photograph in the National Archives and tracked down the men in the picture. Evans was 72 years old. He thought everyone had forgotten. He was wrong. Seeing himself at 22 years old, standing beside the gun that had made history, brought back 50 years of memories. He wrote to the archivist, thanking him, saying it meant more than anyone could know, saying he'd carried Rendova with him every day for 5 decades, saying maybe now he could let some of it go. Evans died in 2004 at age 83. Boone had died in 1998. Gamborowski passed in 2006. The gun crew that had made history on July 4th, 1943, was gone. But the story survived. The photograph survived. The official record survived. The beach at Rendova is quiet now. The guns are gone. The bunkers have collapsed. The jungle has reclaimed most of the positions where the 9th Defense Battalion fought. But every July 4th, a few people remember. Remember the day the planes fell. Remember Evan Evans and Roy Boone and John Gamborowski. Remember that 3 young Marines changed the course of air defense in the Pacific, turning Death Point into a graveyard for those who thought Americans couldn't fight back. They were wrong, and 12 Japanese bombers falling from the sky in 27 minutes proved it.